Well, this week we had Rusty Price with us, and Rusty's been to our church before, and our church really loves him. And one of the things that Rusty is so good at is completing the other side of the gospel. We would call it social justice. Rusty has helped plant hundreds of churches throughout Cuba and Latin America and South America. And our church has partnered with him in this. And so it's just wonderful to bring our focus back to what Jesus talked about as the other side of the gospel. If we're not careful, we'll think about just giving the good news of Jesus Christ. You need to be saved. You need to receive Jesus. Now, people do need to do that, and that is the most important aspect of the gospel. But Jesus said that if you give a cup of cold water in my name, I'll reward you for it. Jesus said, if you see the hungry or the naked or those in prison and you minister to them, you clothe them, you feed them, he said, it's the same as doing it to me. And our church has always been big in this area of the other side of the gospel, as well as telling people about Jesus dying on the cross. James said that if you don't put feet to your prayers and praying for people, if you don't put actions to your words, he said it's really meaningless. And so as a church, we do a lot of that. But today I really want you to think about in your group, not what does our church do, but rather what has Jesus called you to do? How are you to react to social justice? All throughout the Bible talks about helping the poor. It talks about those who are strong and in power, not taking advantage of those that are subject to them. It talks about the disadvantaged. It talks about helping widows and orphans. And so the Bible is really filled with God's heart for people who are in need. So here's the question. What do you as an individual, what do you as a small group do to fulfill what Jesus said for us to do? Let me read to you from Proverbs. Solomon wrote this. He said, if you help the poor, you are lending to the Lord, and He will repay you. Well, think about this. If you're helping the poor, if you're doing this aspect of the gospel, he said you're lending to God. Wow. If you do that, there's no doubt that God is going to bless you. There's no doubt that God Himself is going to repay you. Solomon also said this. He said, blessed are those who are generous because they feed the poor. In other words, our generosity blesses others, but it blesses us as well. And then he said this, whoever gives to the poor will lack nothing. In other words, God meets the needs of people that are concerned about the needs of others. And it is a biblical way of getting out of yourself, out of your own little world, out of your own little problems, and looking and focusing on others, looking at their needs, helping meet them and meet their needs. Because it's amazing what happens when you do that. That your own problems, suddenly you get them in perspective, but then you also begin to see those problems begin to be solved. Now, I know that some of you may be thinking, well, what about those that are scam artists? What about those people that really make probably as much money as I do, but they're scam artists? Or maybe what about those people that are just going to take that money and they're an alcoholic or they're a drug addict and they're just going to go blow it on that? Well, let me tell you that it's true that there are scam artists, and it's true that there are people that are going to do that. But let me tell you about a friend of mine. His name is Jim Rumsey. And Jim Rumsey was one of those people. I actually went to college with Jim. Jim was a man that had a basketball scholarship to the University of Texas, but he got hooked on alcohol and drugs to the point that he became a street person. He was one of those beggars that would beg for money and food. And one day, through some generosity of some people around him, he was able to get to a mission, and he gave his heart and life to Jesus Christ. Jim Rumsey today, he's no longer on the streets, but rather he is a missionary serving God, spreading the good news of Jesus Christ. So the point is this, it's not about what they do, it's about your heart. Only God knows what's going to happen with that. And so I want to challenge you as a group to think about something that you can do for the poor or some needy group of people or some needy person. Think of what you can do this summer to be able to use to let God use you for the other side of the gospel.